Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. If you look back at human history, you see the literal rise, fall, and eventual rebirth of massive global empires. The Romans, the Habsburgs, they expand, they dominate, they overreach, and then they crumble. Well, today we're going to look at a modern sporting equivalent that perfectly mirrors that exact imperial cycle. We are digging into the incredibly fascinating history of the Spanish national football team, La Roja.
Right off the bat, this poses a central mystery for us. How exactly did a nation historically known as football's absolute biggest underachievers manage to build the most dominant, feared international dynasty the game has ever seen? And, maybe even more importantly, what happens when an empire like that inevitably collapses under its own weight? Let's dive in and find out.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the curse of the underachievers.
To really understand their ultimate triumph, we've got to start with the baseline era. For decades, the Spanish national team essentially mirrored a 20th century nation that was fractured by a brutal civil war and a long dictatorship. The sheer agony of that era is perfectly summed up by this timeline of total heartbreak. Back then, they were known for a style called La Furia, the Fury, which was all about ferocious, aggressive intensity. But honestly, that fury only ever led to agonizing quarterfinal exits. In 1982, they hosted the World Cup and were completely humiliated on home soil. Fast forward to 1994, Luis Enrique gets his nose shattered by a brutal elbow in the box against Italy. No penalty was called, and they were sent packing. Then in 2002, they had two perfectly legal goals disallowed against South Korea before crashing out on penalties. The curse was absolutely real.
It actually got so bad that the entire nation adopted this deeply defeatist attitude. They were literally losing half their games in their heads before they even stepped onto the pitch. Get this, they failed to even qualify for the 1992 European Championship because they lost to Iceland. As one source incredibly dramatically put it, Iceland, a disaster of gigantic proportions. They were just terrified of the heavyweights, constantly psyching themselves out.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Spanish football pyramid. Beneath this cursed national team, there was this incredibly complex, somewhat brutal domestic engine, quietly forging a completely different kind of player. If we take a descent down the Spanish league structure, it starts out normally enough. You've got La Liga at the top with 20 teams, then the Segunda Division with 22. But keep going down, and it gets wild. By the time you reach the 4th division, the Segunda RFF, you are looking at a massive, sprawling league of 90 different teams.
Because there are so many clubs in these lower tiers, they have to be hyper-regionalized. You get these strict east and west splits, or highly complex north, south, and central groupings. What does this mean? It means young developing players are thrown into these brutal, high-stakes, hyper-local rivalries week in and week out. It is an absolute pressure cooker. And it was this exact regional forge that eventually produced the most technically gifted generation of players the world had ever seen.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Tiki-Taka Empire.
By 2008, under managers Luis Aragonés and later Vicente del Bosque, Spain had a massive realization. They figured out they simply couldn't outmuscle the biggest teams in the world. So, you know what they did? They just stopped trying. They adopted a system the world would eventually call Tiki-Taka. The philosophy here is simple but totally devastating. Your opponents cannot score if they do not have the ball. Just think about how exhausting it is to chase someone who never lets you catch him. Instead of fighting those rough 50-50 physical battles, Spain just kept the ball away, exhausting teams physically and mentally until a tiny gap opened up.
Executing this system to absolute perfection was a true golden generation, largely flowing from the youth pipelines of Barcelona and Real Madrid. You had Xavi and Andrés Iniesta operating as literal puppet masters in the midfield. Iker Casillas, San Iker, pulling off miracles in goal. Sergio Ramos and Carlos Puyol forming this impenetrable defensive wall. And up top, you had the ruthless finishing of David Villa and Fernando Torres. In 2008, at the European Championship, this generation finally broke the curse. When Fernando Torres scored that iconic winning goal against Germany in the final, it ended a 44-year drought. 44 years! That is how long it had been since Spain's only prior major international trophy, all the way back in 1964. The underachievers were dead, and a dynasty was officially born.
Okay, wrap your head around this jaw-dropping statistic. Between February 2007 and September 2010, the Spanish national team played 57 matches. Do you want to guess how many they lost? 2. Just 2 games out of 57. It was an absolutely unprecedented level of control on the pitch.
And this complete control led to true sporting immortality. They became the first and still the only team in history to win 3 consecutive major tournaments. You had the 2008 Euros, then the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, which they clinched with Iniesta's super dramatic 116th-minute goal in extra time, and finally Euro 2012, where they put on this breathtaking 4-0 dismantling of Italy in the final. They weren't just winning matches anymore, they were fundamentally redefining how the game of football was played.
But as they say, no empire lasts forever. Section 4. The Fall of Tiki-Taka.
Like we mentioned at the start of this explainer, every empire eventually crumbles. By the time the 2014 World Cup rolled around, opponents had essentially solved the Tiki-Taka puzzle. Teams like Switzerland, the US, and eventually the Netherlands realized that if you just refuse to take the bait, Tiki-Taka totally loses its teeth. The world adapted. They started deploying these rigid, disciplined low blocks and intense physicality. They would just sit deep, absorb the endless passing, and then hit Spain on rapid, punishing counterattacks.
To make matters worse, the internal unity that made the Golden Generation so incredibly special began to rot from the inside. At the domestic level, the El Clasico rivalry between Jose Mourinho's Real Madrid and Pep Guardiola's Barcelona became incredibly toxic. Our sources note that this fierce, genuinely nasty club-level friction heavily bled straight into the national team's dressing room, totally fracturing the incredible synergy they once shared.
And so, the empire crumbled. In 2014, Spain suffered a deeply humiliating 5-1 defeat to the Netherlands and was knocked out of the group stage. In 2018, they were eliminated by Russia on penalties. In 2022, it happened again. They missed every single penalty they took in a shootout against Morocco. Their once beautiful style had completely devolved into slow, predictable possession. They were passing the ball a zillion times without generating any real offensive threat. It's a pretty stark reminder that even the absolute greatest strategies become obsolete when they stop evolving.
But don't count them out just yet. Section 5. A New Spanish Dawn.
You can never count out a nation with this much raw talent. Heading into Euro 2024 under new manager Luis de la Fuente, Spain realized it was time to officially bury pure tiki-taka. I mean, look at this stat from their opening match against Croatia. For the first time in 136 games, dating all the way back to 2008, Spain actually lost the possession battle. They only had 46% of the ball. But guess what? They won the game 3-0. They swapped out that slow position for vertical, devastating speed.
Euro 2024 was an absolute tactical rebirth. Driven by fearless youth, especially teenage phenomenons like Lamine Yamal out on the wing, they completely abandoned pure possession for direct, aggressive verticality. And the results were staggering. They won all 7 matches in the tournament, and they didn't take the easy road either. They conquered the absolute heavyweights of European football: Italy, Germany, France, and ultimately England in the final.
This recent success highlights just how much Spain's standing in the world has permanently shifted. You know that old football saying, right? Football is a simple game. 22 men chase the ball for 90 minutes, and at the end, the Germans always win. Well, looking at this data, Spain has actually built a 21st century undefeated streak against those former titans. In 6 official matches against Germany since 2000, Spain has won 4, drawn 2, and lost exactly 0. The old fears are completely gone.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. We have seen the absolute agony of the underachievers, the mesmerizing, totally unprecedented dominance of the Tiki-Taka Golden Generation, the painful collapse of that system, and now this thrilling vertical rebirth. With a fearless new generation that's already conquering Europe, you've really got to ask yourself, are we witnessing the dawn of a brand new Spanish empire? And if we are, how on earth is the rest of the world going to stop them this time? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning what you see out there on the pitch.